brains, which is good. So hopefully we can find everything on one of these brains. As I said, I'm not going to hold you responsible for the meninges because our really good demonstration of them was on the human material that we don't have. But I still want to just tell you about them just because it's good to know. And here we are. So the meninges are the membranes that surround the brain, and there's 3 layers to them in mammals. There's an outer, very tough fibrous layer, and that's called the dura mater. Okay, which literally means the hard mother. There's a kind of shiny, spidery layer that you can most easily see here, where it bridges across these grooves in the cerebral hemisphere. That's called the arachnoid, and so I can kind of pierce it there. That's arachnoid, and it's kind of spidery, hence arachnoid. And then there's a layer of the meninges that completely surrounds the tissue of the brain itself, right on the surface, called the pia mater, or soft mother, and that can't be separated from the brain. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of tell you about that. Again, we're not really going to, I won't hold you to it for the practical. So then let's just generally orient to the brain, which is the one I like. Go. Is it this one? How did it get so torn all of a sudden? I don't know. It's probably me. So these big blobs here, which somehow I did not put this term on the sheet. I have no idea why, but I do want you to know it anyway. These things are what? Generally speaking.
Hemispheres?
Cerebral hemispheres. Okay, yeah. These are the cerebral hemispheres, and they're the main part of what of the 5 divisions of the brain? Diencephalon, mesencephalon. I didn't write it up there. Sorry.
I know, I looked up too.
Like, it's usually on the board. This is the telencephalon. Teal is the one in front. The root of teal is the same as television. It means like end or distant. Distant vision is television. So this is the end of the brain, the front of the brain, the telencephalon. Okay. And the 2 cerebral hemispheres are the main part of the telencephalon. They're separated by a longitudinal fissure that runs down the middle. And this is what I was just looking for, and unfortunately it seems to have torn a bit here. But if you look down in there, you can see this white band that connects the 2 cerebral hemispheres together, and that's called the corpus callosum. Do you see that there? Okay. And it has torn here. There are ridges along the surface of the cerebral hemispheres. What are those?
Gray matter?
They are gray matter, but the actual structure, the ridge, is called a gyrus, pilaris gyri. And then the grooves between them are the sulci. Each one is a sulcus. Just learned in my list. Okay. If we look at the ventral side of the telencephalon, is that the best one? I had a good one. Maybe this was the best. Yeah, I think this was my best one. You can see this structure here. This is the olfactory bulb. Okay. This is the most intact that we've got. Usually they get a little torn up when they're pulling them out of the brain. But do you remember when we looked at the skull, we saw the cribriform plates of the ethmoid, and there were those flat plates of bone that had lots of little holes in them? Okay. But the brain sits right on top of those cribriform plates that are right there, and all those little holes, cribriform foramina, convey the olfactory nerves as they're running from the olfactory epithelium up to the brain, and they enter into the olfactory bulb, basically all over. So you can't see the olfactory nerve on the brain, just like you couldn't in the shark, but it would be entering right here into the olfactory bulb. Okay. Nerves. There is a lateral olfactory tract that runs back from the olfactory bulb to this big swelling. This is the piriform lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. So that's for you guys. Lateral olfactory tract and piriform lobe. Okay. And there's some other lobes of the cerebral hemispheres that we didn't do. There are frontal lobes, temporal lobes, occipital lobes, parietal lobes of the brain. So I'll just point those out while we're here. Okay, that's the telencephalon, first division. Second division then comes after telencephalon would be
Dicephalon.
diencephalon. And di means second or two, so that's easy to remember. And the diencephalon ventrally can be seen in this region right here. It's basically made up of the optic chiasm here in front, and then this structure is the mammillary body behind. Okay, and this whole thing, this whole region is called the hypothalamus. Now, the diencephalon is best thought of as a room or box, which has two walls or sides, a roof and a floor. The floor is the hypothalamus, so that's what we're looking at here. The two sides are the thalamus, which we can't really see in this view, and then the roof, which we'll look at in a second, is the epithalamus. Okay. So, losing some stuff there. So if we spread the cerebral hemispheres apart and look down from above, we can see this structure that's part of the roof or epithalamus, and that's the pineal gland or pineal body. Do you see that? Yes? Okay. You see that little blob? It's right in the midline? Yeah, okay. That's the pineal gland or pineal body. And likewise, I just want to make sure I'm following along my... Yeah, if you look down just in front of that, you can see a cavity or space within the diencephalon, and that's the third ventricle. What are the cavities of the cerebral hemispheres called? This is the third ventricle.
Fourth ventricle.
Lateral.
Lateral ventricles. First and second are the lateral ventricles, and this makes this the third. Okay. Good. Okay, so let's come back to the hypothalamus for the moment. Okay. And flip this out of the way. What you can see here is the optic chiasm. What's coming in here are the two optic nerves, the left and the right optic nerves, and they've been chopped off. But they come to this X-shaped structure called the optic chiasm. Chi in Greek is the Greek X, so that's why it's called a chiasm. And some of the fibers coming in from the eye stay on the same side of the brain as the eye. Some cross over. That's what this X is all about. And that allows you to have depth perception, basically to have each side of the brain receiving input from both eyes to be able to compare those inputs to be able to tell that there's something different and therefore tell that there's depth in the world. Okay. That's the optic chiasm. Right behind the optic chiasm is this little blob that doesn't look very impressive. There's a little hole where it used to attach. And in fact, we could kind of flip this back. You'll see that there was something attached there. This is the pituitary or hypophysis here. And that connection to the rest of the hypothalamus is the infundibulum. Okay, so here's the pituitary, that's the infundibulum there. Okay, and we had one of these other brains where it was still intact. So there's pituitary and there's infundibulum. That's what it should look like. Okay, that make sense? Hypophysis. Okay. The little region here at the back of the infundibulum doesn't look very impressive in these brains, but that's called the tuber cinerarium, and that literally means the gray. Cinerarium is gray root or tuber, and it's just this little area of the hypothalamus. But the larger structure that's easy to see, easy to put a pin in, that's part of the hypothalamus is this thing here, and that's the mammillary body that I mentioned already, or mammillary bodies. In humans, it looks like two little breasts, which gave it its name, the mammillary bodies. Okay. And then the thalamus, I mentioned already, it's over on the sides. We can't really see it from this view. We'll look at it when we see this. Look at the sagittal brain. Okay. So then we move back behind the diencephalon, what do we get to? What's the next section of the brain?
Mesencephalon?
Mesencephalon, or midbrain. So diencephalon and telencephalon are the forebrain together, and we get to the midbrain. Ventrally, what we see of the midbrain are these two kind of stalks here that connect up to the cerebral hemispheres. These are called the cerebral peduncles, which means the little feet of the cerebral hemispheres. Okay. They're basically big fiber tracts that are connecting the cerebral hemispheres to the rest of the brain. Okay, see that okay? Here and here. Okay. There's a cranial nerve that comes out right in the middle of that cerebral peduncle on either side. What cranial nerve would that be?
Ocular motor?
That's the oculomotor. And what number is that? It's
4?
one of those numbers. Not yet. 3. Yeah, optic is 2, oculomotor is 3. So it's one of those nerves. Okay. There's a lot of blood vessels. You probably noticed also on the surface of the brain. Okay. What else am I doing? Optic tract. Oh, optic tract. Yes, let's take a look at that. So if we look at the optic chiasm, you see that if we follow the fibers up over around the dorsal surface of the brain, we can follow them all the way up like this, around the mesencephalon there, and that's called the optic tract, and that's carrying information from the eyes back up towards the superior colliculi. Okay, do you see this guy here?
So why is that not part of the diencephalon? Or is it part of both?
It's part of the mesencephalon. Because even though it looks, this is diencephalon here, this is basically running kind of back, and it's crossing over into the mesencephalon. I guess that's the best way to explain it. So they're actually running backwards, even though it looks sort of more like they're just running dorsally. And what else do I want to say? Oh, so then if we look dorsally on the surface of the mesencephalon, midbrain, what you'll see is that there's basically 4 bumps present. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the corpora quadrigemina. 1, 2, 3, 4, or the 4 brother bodies. 1, 2, 3, 4. See that? Okay. And the 2 more cranial ones are the superior colliculi. The 2 more caudal ones are the inferior colliculi. And the superior colliculi here look very much similar to something we already saw in the shark on the roof of its midbrain. Does anyone remember what that was? Okay. The optic lobes. Yeah, optic lobes. And they're basically doing the same thing. So they're getting input from the eyes and helping control reflexes that involve the eyes. And the inferior colliculi are involved in audition hearing. Okay. So those are the corpora quadrigemina, or the 4 brother bodies. Okay, so that's mesencephalon, I think. Oh, trochlear nerves. Let's see. So the trochlear nerve, the 4th cranial nerve, is the only one that comes out of the brain dorsally. And it comes out right here at the back of the midbrain, and it's this little guy right here. See this right in there? This one right there. See that? Did you read it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that guy. All right, it's captured on film.
That's the trochlear.
That's the trochlear nerve, which is number what?
4.
4. All right, good. Good. So that's the mesencephalon, or midbrain. Get back behind the mesencephalon, we get into the
Metencephalon?
metencephalon. Excellent. Okay. And so this is the ventral part of the metencephalon from here to here. This is called the pons, which literally means bridge. Okay. what's much more prominent is the dorsal part of the metencephalon, this big structure, which is
Cerebellum.
the cerebellum. Yeah, the cerebellum. And the cerebellum has parts to it. It has this central ridge running along that's called the vermis, which means worm. So it looks kind of like a worm running along there, I guess. Okay. And then there's a left and a right cerebellar hemisphere on either side. And then down around ventrolaterally is this little, actually it's showing up as well, and this guy is on the last one. Don't like it as well here. It's okay. Separate it off. Just to make it clear. This little lobe here, and this, I really like the name of it. It's called the flocculonodular lobe. That's got a, what a great name that is. The flocculonodular lobe, the cerebellum. Okay. And do you remember the auricles of the cerebellum in the shark? Okay, these are basically homologous with the auricles of the shark. Okay. So the cerebellum is basically a major motor control center. People who have issues with their cerebellum have trouble with moving smoothly. They can move, but sort of jerkily and in an uncoordinated manner. And it basically connects to the rest of the brain by fibers that either are running forward up towards the diencephalon or backwards down towards the medulla and spinal cord. And those fibers can be seen on the outside. So you see fibers that run from the pons straight up here towards the cerebellum. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's called the middle cerebellar peduncle. And there's other names for all these. That's called the brachium pontis, which literally means the arm of the pons. But I prefer to just call it the middle cerebellar peduncle. It's easier. It's tearing a bit. That's okay. If you pull the cerebellum back, you can look here and see there's fibers running from the cerebellum forward in the brain, and that's the cranial or anterior cerebellar peduncle, right here. And then if we pull the medulla back and look at the back end of the brain here, you can see fibers that are running towards the cerebellum from back here, and that's the caudal or posterior cerebellar peduncle, right in here. Yeah, see those guys? All right. Good? All right. Beautiful. Then, last but not least, there is a big nerve that leaves from the middle of the pons. And I'm just wondering which of my brains was the good one here. This is good for it. So here again is the pons, and you'll see there's a big nerve here leaving right out of the pons. And what is that? Number are we up to so far? We've done 1, 2, 3, 4. So this must be 5. The trigeminal.
Trigeminal.
So the trigeminal means literally the 3 brothers. Because it has 3 main branches. The trigeminal nerve. And often you'll see a big stump of it kind of stuck in the dura mater here, where the dura mater is being pulled off the brain. It's a big nerve, but often it just kind of gets ripped off and leaves a tiny little stump behind. Okay, so that's the metencephalon. Now we get to the, what's the last part? Myelencephalon. The myelencephalon has a lot of the cranial nerves coming out of it. We've only gotten to 5 so far, so all the rest, 6 through 12, come out of the myelencephalon. What's the other name for myelencephalon, by the way? What's that structure? Starts with an M? Medulla, yeah. So the medulla oblongata is the structure. Myelencephalon is the region, but they're basically the same thing. Okay. So cranial nerves that are leaving the medulla or myelencephalon is the number 6. The abducens, that's this one here. Okay, see that? And what's that going to? Anyone? let's just
The-
generally speaking, what's it going to?
The eye?
Okay, to the eye, to
Move.
the eyes. Is it involved in vision?
Doesn't it move it that way?
It moves it sideways. Yes, it's going to an eye muscle, and it's going to move it to lateral.
Oblique? No, the other one, rectus.
Rectus.
Oh.
There you go. Lateral rectus. Yeah. So that's the nerve going to the lateral rectus. That's the abducens. Number 6, and then this brain actually does allow us to see some of these other nerves that are usually hard to find. So the abducens is missing on this side, but we can see pretty well there the facial nerve, number 7. Do you see that? You might not agree that that's pretty well, but that's the facial nerve there. Yeah. Okay. One of these other brains had it slightly better. I have many brains here, so I have something to try to find all these things on. Yeah, this was good for it. So here's the facial nerve again, number 7, right out here. Do you see that? And then this is good because you can actually see number 8. That's the auditory nerve right there, just a little bit posterior and dorsal to the 7th. So that's number 7, the facial, and number 8, the auditory.
On the practical, you wouldn't be able to pin those, would you? Or could you? I mean, how would you ask about those? Would you just pin a part and say which nerve comes out of this, or?
No, I would definitely not do that. Like on this particular brain, they're actually not too bad. I might feel, since you can see 6, 7, and 8 all on this brain, I would feel probably reasonably comfortable pinning 7 and asking you about it. It would be, that would be tough. But I do have some small pins. But there's, in reality, I'm more likely to pin one of the larger nerves that everyone has seen is really comfortable with. But it would be fair. Okay, so this is number 7 here, facial. This guy here is number 8, the auditory. Okay. So you have to admit, they're actually nicer on the shark because you can see them connecting. Okay. So then, what comes after number 8? Auditory or vestibulocochlear?
Number 9.
Yes! You're on it. Good play. And that starts with the G.
Glossopharyngeal.
Glossopharyngeal. And
That one.
in the mammalian brain, the glossopharyngeal number 9 runs out with the vagus, which is number 10. So you really are going to be hard pressed to distinguish them, but you can see them both coming out very nicely on this brain. Do you see that here? Those are the glossopharyngeal and vagus coming out here.
Okay.
The Vegas is the smaller one?
They're basically together. You can't really.
Oh, okay.
So those two, that thing that I'm pointing at is the glossopharyngeal and vagus. Okay. There. And big important nerves. They actually are better seen here than often. Okay. So we're down to now 11 and 12. 11 is what?
Hypoglossal.
It's the sexy and nerve,
Oh.
the SA, so the spinal accessory. Okay. And this is the one that's basically a piece of the vagus that in mammals splits off and becomes its own nerve. And we can see it very beautifully actually in this brain right there. It's the spinal accessory. It has a piece of it that runs up along the spinal cord and joins in. It's called the spinal roots, and there's cranial roots. They come together to form the spinal accessory. That's number 11. And then last but not least is number 12, which is, go ahead.
Oh, the hypoglossopharyngeal.
No pharyngeal in this one, just the hypoglossal.
Oh,
Yeah,
there you go.
okay. And that's going to the hypo below glossal tongue. It's going to all those hypobranchial muscles like the genioglossus, et cetera, that are down here going up into the tongue. Okay. And the hypoglossal is this nerve right here. Okay. And the main thing to notice about the hypoglossal, this is supposed to be the furthest back. It's not really as far back as the spinal accessory, but it comes out very far medially on the underside of the brain compared to all the other nerves. So that's hypoglossal there. Okay, do you see that? And if you compare that to the glossopharyngeal and vagus here, that's hypoglossal, that's glossopharyngeal and vagus. See how it's coming out way further medially? Okay. So that's glossopharyngeal and vagus, that's hypoglossal. Okay. So it's kind of nice to be able to see them at the same time. It helps. Okay. But unfortunately, we don't always get them on the brains at the same time. Everyone see that okay? Okay. So those are all the rest of the cranial nerves coming out. In terms of the myelencephalon, aside from all these nerves, a few other structures that are on the list, I'll point out. You can see them well on that guy. Here we can see it a little bit. So the cavity of the myelencephalon, of the medulla oblongata, is what? What ventricle are we talking about here? Fourth ventricle, yep. And so there's a roof over that fourth ventricle, and it's called the tila choroidea. Tila means roof, and choroidea means it's got blood vessels in it. And it's involved in secreting cerebrospinal fluid into that ventricle. And it's very thin and membranous and easily torn, but you can see at least a bit of it remaining there. And then the cavity that I'm poking down into through that roof is the fourth ventricle. Yeah? Anyway. If you're feeling that you don't see something, or don't believe me, tell me. Otherwise, I'm just going to move on. Okay, fourth ventricle. And then it says first spinal nerve, and I do not see that on any of our brains, so I will not worry about the first spinal nerve. It'd be cool to see it. Okay. So that gets us then to a sagittal section of the brain. Okay, so this is a sagittal section of the sheep brain. Okay. And one thing that's really good to notice when you look at a sagittal section is that the telencephalon here, the cerebral hemisphere really in particular, basically starts at the front end of the brain and it grows forward and up and over the rest of the brain. And so if you were to just kind of chop off all of that, about that much, you would be left with something that looks a lot more like a shark brain. Okay. And this is really the key thing in mammals, is just this huge expansion of the cerebral hemispheres. So what we're looking at mainly then here is the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. And you can see this kind of C-shaped whitish structure there. That's the corpus callosum that's been cut. And again, those are fibers that are running across, connecting the two cerebral hemispheres together. Just below that, there's a very thin membrane here. This is called the septum pellucidum, which means the septum is just a partition. Pellucid means that you can kind of see through it. And that's basically the medial wall of this space that I've now in, because I poked through that. This space is the space in the cerebral hemisphere, so that would be the
Lateral ventricle.
lateral ventricle, exactly. So this is in the lateral ventricle. And you'll notice there is a band of fibers below that septum pellucidum. The corpus callosum is above, but there's this other band of fibers below, right there.
Fornix.
That's the fornix, yes, excellent, okay. And the fornix is carrying information from the piriform lobe here that's getting olfactory input around like this and down towards the hypothalamus, the mammillary bodies. And all of that together is part of what's called the limbic system that's involved in control of emotional states. And so these fornix, I want to say fornicating fibers, these fibers of the fornix are running down towards the hypothalamus. Okay. That's lateral ventricle. You may have noticed, somebody had asked me about it earlier, this kind of goopy stuff that's in the lateral ventricle. That's the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle, and that's what's secreting cerebrospinal fluid into the lateral ventricle. Okay. Fornix. Okay. A little hard to see it here, but make it out. You see a little round whitish structure right there? Right there. That's called the anterior commissure. And it's fibers that are running across between the two sides of the brain. There's a little plate of tissue that it's part of called the lamina terminalis. And the reason I wanted you to notice this is that this is embryonically the anterior end of the brain. And everything in front of that and above it then is this outgrowth of the cerebral hemisphere that's kind of bulged out. Okay, so that's a good landmark for the front of the brain. I think we'll go to our other one that was a little prettier. Yeah, let's look at this for now. Just switched sides on you, didn't I? Sorry about that. We're here then is the telencephalon. We move back behind the telencephalon. We're into diencephalon again. Okay. And what's the cavity of the diencephalon? The third ventricle. And so this space right here, where you can see that it's all shiny, is the ependymal epithelium, or the lining of the third ventricle. Okay. And it's actually formed kind of a ring or donut shape right here. It's like a slit down the middle of the brain, but there's a bridge across the two sides. That's called the interthalamic adhesion that connects the thalamus here of one side to the thalamus of the other side. Okay. And the third ventricle connects to the lateral ventricle by a hole that I'm putting a probe through here, and that's called the interventricular foramen between the third ventricle and the lateral ventricle. Okay. And it basically passes just lateral to the fornix there. Okay, good. All right. Oh, where's my other sagittal that actually had a pineal? This is nice because this one, unlike most of the sagittals, maintained its pineal. So there's the pineal gland, or pineal body, that you can see from here. So that's the epithalamus again, this region with the pineal. This is the thalamus, and then down here is hypothalamus. What's this? This guy here?
Optic
Yeah, that's
chimera
the one.
or
Chiasm.
chiasm.
Yes. It's a miasm. Something different. Yeah, that's optic chiasm. So this hypothalamus there, epithalamus here, pineal, and then that's all thalamus. Okay. All right. So then coming back from the diencephalon to the midbrain or mesencephalon, we're looking at this region in here, okay, as the midbrain. And you'll notice here's the superior and inferior caliculi. So you can see them from this view as well, just to orient superior and inferior caliculi. And then here's that channel that runs through the midbrain, which would be the cerebral aqueduct. Yeah, exactly. So that's cerebral aqueduct there. Okay. And then that leads into a big space back here. What's this big space?
Fourth ventricle.
The fourth ventricle. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the fourth ventricle is in the met and the myelencephalon. Main thing to see in this view is just this big structure here. What's this in general?
Cerebellum.
That's the cerebellum. You'll notice that you can see gray matter, the darker colored substance here, and white matter. The white matter is basically fibers that have myelin on them, so they're carrying axons and dendrites going to various places. The gray matter is the actual cell bodies of the neurons that are all on the surface. And the shape of the white matter in the cerebellum looks like a tree. So this is the arbor vitae, which is the tree of life. And it's cool looking. And I have to tell you, it's one of my favorite structures. So you may see it again at some point, maybe with a pin in it.
How would you differentiate between asking, like, is this white matter or is this the arbor vitae?
I'd put a pin in it and I would say, what is this structure? If I wanted arbor vitae. If I wanted white matter, I would say, what do we call this type of neural tissue? Something like that. Would that be clear? Mm-hmm. I try to be clear, but sometimes it's hard.
I want to know how to think of it.
Yeah. Very fair question. Okay, and that, I believe, are all the parts of the brain that you guys need to know.